Jeremiah, welcome.
Thank you.
You had reached out to me asking about peptides, and one in particular. I hadn't heard of it. So I would have been researching just the same way you would have been researching. And I thought it might be interesting to go through how I would go about researching it and walk through that process and see how it's different than maybe how a layperson might do research on a medical topic. The first thing I did was I created a Google Doc. I'm just going to start building this out. I'll have this link in the YouTube description below. It's a link to a Gemini LLM chat that I think people might find useful to work through. The first way that I approach this question, and this is one of the biggest differences, I think, between how I do research and how most people do research, is what was the name of the peptide?
I believe it was IGF-1 LR3.
LR3. Okay. So before I do any research whatsoever, I would say, okay, why am I interested in this? Like, why are you interested?
I feel like right now I'm really involved in the social media space. So I get a lot of my information from social media. So
of course.
Things like
I think we all do.
Yeah, Instagram, TikTok, things like that. I get a lot of my information more from there than Google News, things like that. So right now, it's a very big thing in the gym community. So I feel like a lot of people my age are involved in the gym, and it's kind of became a big thing to use instead of steroids. A lot of people have been promoting them because the side effects are nowhere near what steroids are.
Okay.
And
So
don't want to use steroids because of the side effects. So this has been the new wave for, I guess, the younger gym community, mostly just in part of that, and the benefits that it gives much more outweigh the side effects.
Sure. And so what benefits? So instead of steroids, less side effects?
At least with the research I've done, for specific ones, it depends on what it does to your body. So for IGF-1, for example, what it does is it builds new muscle fibers in your body. And it's basically the difference between a peptides and steroids is it's basically like a kick in the pants for your hormones to produce the growth hormone, things like that, the different hormones that builds that muscle. While steroids, it's not natural.
So again, I'm looking for outcomes. If this, increases your hormones and there's no difference in your body, you don't care about the theoretical effect on your hormone. Like, oh, hey, my number's higher. You want the muscle gain, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the goal here is muscle gain?
Usually the primarily thing is muscle gain. The other thing is usually fat loss. And there's really a peptide for everything. I've seen one called retatrutide, which it decreases your appetite and it basically promotes fat loss, speeding up metabolism, things like that. There's also one actually for tanning. So you take it and it allows you to tan a lot more effective without burning and things like that.
Sure.
And then I've also seen one for hair growth, clearing up your skin, nails, like that.
My point is that for any particular one of them, you have to figure out what the claim is. What's the actual claim here that this thing does? So you say, okay, it's muscle gain.
Yeah.
So say muscle gain and fat loss, we'll highlight those.
Okay, yeah, I feel like those are the two top ones that people usually are looking for.
Okay. And for each of them, okay, you say this one causes fat loss and reduced appetite. Okay, the reason I emphasize this is that if you want to gain muscle, you don't want to take the one for tanning, right?
Yeah.
You want to know what you're aiming for.
Yeah.
Right? It also allows you to evaluate claims, because I think a lot of things in the wellness, health, gym community are framed, I call it the razzle-dazzle fallacy, is I'll get you into talking about your metabolism and the IGF and the growth-like factor, and it does this in your cells, and it's like, okay. And ultimately, it all comes down to what is the real benefit to me, and the rest is a story. It's a story about how it supposedly gets there. Most of that is bullshit. And the reason that that's bullshit is I can tell you an amazing story about why aspirin should cause blood clots. right?
Yeah.
And it's true. Every bit of that story is true. Aspirin has effects on cyclooxygenase, has effects on prostacyclin, which is known to promote. I can tell you a great story. Now, the
Yeah.
reality is aspirin does the opposite of that. It reduces clots. The hype online uses the language of science to razzle dazzle you into thinking something's good without evaluating the final claim. And so that's the
Yeah.
final claim is muscle gain. That's
Yeah.
fine. Great. How are we measuring muscle gain? What's the measurement?
A lot of people, what they do is they
Yeah,
take a DEXA scan before, and then they take one after whenever they
sure.
finish their cycle or whatever.
That's not awful. So DEXA's reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that, and I'm going to put that in a different color. We're considering that an acceptable standard. Whether I agree or disagree, I'm just saying how we do research,
Yeah.
right? It's up to you to decide, is the bioelectric impedance method with the fat loss scale, is that good enough for you? Maybe not, right? If not, then maybe DEXA. Is DEXA good enough for you, or are you going to insist on an MRI? Part of what I'm starting to build here is a standard of belief, a standard of evidence to say any study that just uses visual estimate, I'm not going to accept as valid. Any study that uses the fat loss scale with just the regular home pad with the electrical thing, that's
Yeah.
not accurate enough for me. I want at least DEXA or higher, right?
Yeah.
So DEXA, ultrasound, MRI. Now, you can make arguments in all these different directions, but you have to figure out before you dive into any research, what is your standard of evidence?
Yeah.
So that's the measurement method that we're going to accept. I'm going to put a plus sign here. So DEXA plus. The next thing we have to figure out is control. In the medical community, we always say placebo here. And that's important. There was a study, and I'll try and dig this up if I can, and I'll put a link in the description. There was a study in which they told people they were giving them anabolic steroids, and they inject them with anabolic steroids, and they grew quite a lot of muscle,
Yeah.
but they didn't give them any steroids. It was all placebo. It was a 100% placebo study. And they grew quite a lot of muscle, and these were trained lifters.
Yeah.
These were not newbies, right?
Yeah.
And they said, oh man, yeah, that stuff's working. Like, man, I'm really growing muscle. And they really were. You can come up with any explanation you like for how. Were they just training harder because they believed that they were on steroids? Were they eating? Or was it just mind over matter? Who knows? Who cares? Right?
Yeah.
The point is, you can demonstrate real muscle growth improvements in trained lifters
Yeah.
with placebo,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
So if you're taking a substance, it better do better than placebo.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just inject saline to be safer. Now, randomization is also important because you can say, I'm just going to compare people that have done anabolics and people that did IGF-1 LR3,
Yeah.
right? Now, the problem is, what if the people that do IGF LR3 are all younger than the people that do steroids? It's more popular in the younger crowd, right?
Yeah.
So they grow more muscle than the anabolic steroid guys, but you didn't actually test the substances. You just tested that younger people grow muscle better. So randomization is hugely important as well. So randomization, I'll pick different colors, and some sort of control. Ideally placebo, although there's a lot of other ways of controlling. All right. So this sets up my research. Now I can do research to say, hey, for IGF-1 LR3, is there any study that uses DEXA as a measurement to show muscle gain and fat loss that has a control and was randomized to demonstrate efficacy? So now you're not doing research just like typing IGF-1, right?
Yeah.
You're doing research to say, hey, I have standards of evidence,
Yeah.
right? I sort of took on a basic persona when I was having this chat with Gemini. I started with the notion, just what are peptides, right? What are we talking about here? And it gives its answer. It's an amino acid combo and this and that. And it said, oh, they can act as hormones, neurotransmitters, or signaling molecules.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. There are hormones? And so it's like, yes, they can function as hormones. So insulin is a peptide, glucagon, oxytocin, growth hormone is a peptide, PTH is a peptide. And I said, well, what about neurotransmitters? And so said they have a bunch of different roles. So pain perception, like substance P, which is what capsaicin works on, stress response, appetite, leptin and ghrelin. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Those are hunger and satiety hormones. And yes, those are peptides as well. Ozempic is a peptide.
Yeah.
That's Are there any examples of peptides that are known to be harmful or dangerous? A lot of venoms and poisons of snakes and scorpions are peptides.
Hmm.
Okay, well, hang on.
I think
And
it's
so now
like healing
I want to
stuff.
say, yeah, Gemini or any of the LLMs is going to toe the company line, right? So it's like touted for healing and recovery. It's unregulated risk, carries risks including nausea, blood pressure, et cetera, yada yada. I don't really care about that stuff, right? Okay, it's unknown long term effects. That's fair. That's true to some degree, but that's true of anything that's new. So that's not, you're taking a risk there. You're taking a risk anytime you're doing something new, and so it's up to every individual on some level. Do you want to wait for 30 years of data? You can, but then you're 30 years behind the curve, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should jump into all these things, but it's important to know. And so then I ask this: how can I know whether a peptide is helpful or harmful? Now, again, they're towing the company line here. I don't know, especially given the shenanigans at the FDA, I don't know that I think that's a huge factor listed
Yeah.
here, right?
Actually, a question I have for you regarding the
Yeah,
FDA. So, peptides aren't FDA approved. So, do you think
sure.
that I've seen a lot of people say the reason they aren't approved right now is because when they now is like the reason to get on them because once they become FDA approved, they're going to just jack up the prices. And right now, they're actually pretty affordable for people to get. So I guess a lot of people are saying once they become FDA approved, is when they're going to be 3 times the price that they are now. And once they get FDA approved, you got to have an FDA approved one, or else it's just completely illegal. So that's kind of what I've seen. A lot of people have been saying, yeah, like the FDA, the reason they're not approving this is because all this other stuff, price factors, stuff like that.
That's probably true. I mean, in some sense, in that if the FDA approves something, it becomes a drug, right?
Yeah,
It becomes a regulated drug,
yeah,
and whoever's manufacturing it gets to charge a higher price.
yeah,
Let's say the majority of that's actually just pure profit seeking, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's the reality of big pharma. But there are also like, hey, okay, the FDA inspects facilities, the quality of the product has to be assured, the purity of the product has to be assured, it
yeah,
has to actually contain what it says on the label. That's a big problem in the unregulated space is it says IGF-1 LR3 on the label, but how do
yeah,
you know that's actually what's in there? It could be anabolic steroids. What's my assurance that the label reflects the actual contents?
yeah,
And maybe you will grow a bunch of muscle and you'll think it's great and it was anabolic steroids all along. That we see that actually very commonly in the male enhancement arena, right? So they'll say, "Oh, take this Shilajit herb for longer and better erections," and it just contains Viagra, right? It's just unregulated Viagra, and so it works, but it doesn't contain any Shilajit. It just contains Viagra. Right? Now, if you have a medical contraindication to Viagra, that gets pretty dangerous, right?
yeah,
That's one of the issues with unregulated anything is there's no guarantees
yeah,
that it contains it, or you have to take the company's word for it. And it's not like these research labs that are selling this stuff are any less profit motivated than big pharma.
yeah,
They're out to make a killing too. Like they're trying to get in on the action before it gets regulated and make their money, right? So it's not like they're some sort of like heavenly agent out of pure intentions. They're selling it cheaply, right?
yeah,
So does it mimic a natural hormone or neurotransmitter? That's an interesting question. If it's mimicking something natural in your body, meaning a peptide is mimicking growth hormone, well, then you can predict maybe it does a lot of the things that growth hormone does. It a little bit begs the question, why not just take growth hormone? Right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what makes the peptide any better? Just because it's a peptide doesn't mean anything. It's a hormone just like anything else. And that's where I start to argue a little bit with people when they're like, well, it's not a steroid. And I'm like, it's not chemically a steroid. That's true, right? Chemically, a steroid hormone has a particular chemical composition. But if it's activating all the same receptors, if it's doing all the same things, then it doesn't make any difference. At the end of the day, it'll have the same side effects as a steroid because it's doing the same things, right?
yeah,
Now, if it's not like anything natural, if no similar substance in your body exists, and it's having all these different effects on different transmitters, and so you're saying, well, because it's not like anything in your body, then it has a different set of effects and you can avoid some of the side effects of steroids. I'm like, okay, cool, that's possible, but now you can't even predict what its effects are, right? Because you're saying inherently that it's something new, that it's not like anything else. So now you have a real prediction issue because you're saying it's not like anything else. So that's the two sides. Either it's like something, in which case you're going to get all the same side effects as that something, or it's not like something, in which case you can't really predict what it's going to do. I did throw this in. Can you give me an examples of something that were really hyped and popular but turned out to be ineffective or even harmful? And I think we lose track of this history. We don't appreciate the hype cycle that we are in. Something about our mind says this hype cycle is different. GPT-5 just got released a few days ago. I don't know if you're in the AI space or whatever. Pretty disappointing, right?
Yeah.
But the hype cycle was, oh, it's going to be AGI. And Altman said, like, oh, yes, it's definitely going to be a huge step forward. We're in the hype. Now, I predicted years ago, 2 years, 3 years ago, technology grows on S curves. It doesn't grow very much. It has a huge exponential spike, and then it levels off and grows slowly. We see that with self-driving cars, right? Now, 20 years later, we're starting to get self-driving. But Elon's been promising that every year since 2016.
Yeah.
But it just takes longer when you're on the S part of that, the top S part of that curve, which is where AI is now. There was a huge exponential growth, and now we're on the slow, gradual, incremental improvement. And when you're on the exponential side, something in people's minds thinks it will always be exponential. It's just going to keep being exponential, and then all these amazing things are going to happen, even though every technology just becomes an S curve at the end. And so I think it really is useful to think about all the times that there's been a hype cycle, people jumped on board, millions of people, smart people. And again, intelligence is no barrier. Steve Jobs fell for alternative medicine for his pancreatic cancer. Look up Nobel laureate syndrome, right? There's been Nobel laureates in physics that believe in spirits and alchemy and crystals. Just because you're smart in one area doesn't mean that you can make intelligent decisions in another area that's outside your expertise. In particular, and I'm going to mention this briefly, when radioactivity was first discovered, people sold radium dissolved in water as a health tonic. We didn't know anything about radioactivity. We didn't know anything about its effects on the body, but they said, oh, this is the nuclear energy. It's going to give you the energy of life. And it was a great story. It sounded good. And so Eben Byers, he drank this stuff all the time, was a big proponent of it, was a famous rich guy in his time, and died of it. Mercury is given for syphilis, right? For years, right? For centuries back then. Bloodletting was used. The HCG diet, I don't know if you remember that. Do you remember that? I mean, you might be too young. That was a popular diet.
I don't remember that now.
Okay, yeah. So this hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin, which is typically associated with pregnancy, but had some story about how it causes increased metabolism, and then combined with severe calorie restriction, it was advertised as this amazing weight loss diet. And yes, people lost a ton of weight, but they didn't lose any more weight than they would have lost on a calorie restriction diet without the hormone.
Yeah.
Right? The reason I bring that one up is social media continues to create this interesting effect where you're not aware of what the other hype cycles are in other areas. So if you're really into astrology, you'll get a bunch of astrology social media. And you're going to get a lot of people hyping up astrology and saying, man, my horoscope was so accurate. And you're going to get all these anecdotes and case reports and stories of how it helped these people. And because you're soaking up that media, it reinforces this idea that astrology is a great way of improving your life and predicting the future. Mm-hmm. And the same thing is true of the carnivore diet. If you get into that, you'll find people talking about that. Veganism, you can get into that. And you will find a ton of anecdotes and stories supporting these ideas in any rabbit hole you go down.
Yeah.
Right? You'll find very few people saying, man, I'm a dumbass. I believed in this thing and it's bullshit. Very few people are going to admit that after the fact. And so you won't hear those stories. Those stories become absent because of the social pressure to be right and to be smart and to look good. And so you're only going to hear positive reports on any rabbit hole you go to on any subject whatsoever. And so people will say, oh, I hear all these reports. It's like, yeah, that's true of anything. Literally anything you look up, you're going to hear a bunch of positive reports, right?
Yeah.
The question of whether we're in a hype cycle or whether there is real scientific evidence for something or not is an important question to ask. And again, that's why I created this document here. That's why it's important to have standards of what you will accept as evidence. We can start asking better questions even if we're using AI to do the research. This might be a question for deep research. right?
Mhm.
What are the safety concerns?
Mhm.
Cancer promotion, hypoglycemia, acromegaly, organ enlargement, all of which go along with anything that simulates human growth factor. If you just take growth factor, you're going to get those same effects. So that's not like rocket science there. So clinical trials on other IGF-1 variants exist. Okay, that's very good. Or maybe we can use ChatGPT. No double-blind placebo-controlled trials. Here's a double-blind placebo-controlled trial of IGF-1, not LR3, but IGF-1. Clinical trials have not been successful due to ineffective delivery method. So, by the way, you'll see me scrolling through this, and this is important, right? Every research paper has to justify its existence. So, in the beginning, they're like, let's tell this story about, oh, it does this and it does that and it does this third thing and X, Y, and Z. It's all storytelling. It's just a story, just like I can tell you a story about aspirin. The important part about this is that many times in the history of medicine, you will see some story told about some medication, and even just using FDA approved medications. Zygris is a great example. That's my favorite because it was in my lifetime, in my training history, right? So I was in residency, this medication came out and it had a great story. It said, hey, people that are dying of overwhelming infection, one of the things we see is that we see a significant reduction in protein C. So we're going to give this medication that increases protein C and it's going to reduce death. Now, it turned out it actually killed people. The FDA approved this, by the way, and they had to take it off the market because it turned out it was killing people. Now, it had a great story. It had all this scientific sounding, oh, it affects this pathway and that pathway and all this fancy sounding jargon. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a placebo-controlled randomized trial. So that's why I skimmed through all this stuff, is because this is all bullshit storytelling to get you to ignore the fact that they have failed, right?
Yeah.
So rather than saying, hey, IGF-1 trials have failed, it probably doesn't work, they say, oh, why have they failed? Oh, it's a delivery method. Or like, even for ALS trial, the subcutaneous injection of IGF in ALS patients did not show beneficial effects. After how many pages of talk of leading you up to the benefits of IGF-1, telling you how it affects skeletal muscle, telling you all the good things it does. And then this is one line right here, under a heading that says, why have they failed, as though we're going to find some way around this issue. And maybe we will. I'm not saying we won't, but it's a pretty odd presentation of the fact that the literature says that IGF-1 has failed in double-blind placebo-controlled trials. That's the actual message here, but it's buried in this storytelling language. One of the challenges that we face is figuring out to preset our standards of evidence. Before we do research, what am I going to call bullshit? What would convince me that this is not effective? If I can find double-blind placebo-controlled trials of the closest related substance that was not effective, to me, that's a pretty good indicator that the hype cycle is probably just a hype cycle. Now, if new evidence comes out and says, hey, IGF-LR3 is different, and here's a double-blind placebo-controlled trial with a DEXA measurement, and we got 60, 70 people, and look, people really gained more muscle on this than placebo, then great, I follow the evidence. Here, there's just an absence of evidence, and the big issue is that just like astrology, because I really do encourage people to go to astrology subreddits and that kind of stuff, and consider the fact of how convinced these people are. Right? Or anything you don't believe in. I'm picking on the astrology people. Anything you think is bullshit. Pick your poison, whether it's crystals or whatever you think is bullshit. If you go to those subreddits and realize how convinced those people are, how they tell stories of what their experience was with that thing and the positive experiences that they had with it, you'll realize that this is exactly what's happening. Your bias is just different. Peptide sounds fancy and sciencey. You're a fancy sciencey guy. It sounds technical. You follow whoever you follow, and that's why it sounds better. When really, if you were a crystally type guy, then all of those things would sound better. Right? In neither case do you have a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. That's the important thing for people to realize, is that it's very easy to be convinced by anecdote and story. It's much harder to be rigid in your standards of evidence and say, I'm willing to be convinced. I'm not closed-minded, but this is the standard of what will convince me.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be willing to be wrong and say, oh, hey, shit, I had this whole podcast with Jeremiah, and tomorrow's study comes out on IGF-LR3. I'm going to have to put out a podcast and say, hey, guys, I was wrong. I doubted this. But yeah, I think it probably won't work when you compare it to placebo. But that's true of most things. Now, some of those things I will be wrong about. Some of those things I will doubt them and be skeptical, and the double-blind placebo-controlled trials will actually show a benefit. First of all, those will be in the minority. And second of all, I'll change my mind immediately because it will have met my standard of evidence, and I'll be like, cool, I'm going to start recommending this for my patients. I don't know if you follow Israel.
Yeah, I've heard of him before.
Okay. He had a podcast recently talking about turkesterone. Do you remember when turkesterone was big? It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. No, I do remember
Okay.
that.
So Huberman came on the Joe Rogan podcast and said, oh, turkesterone, same story, right? It works just as well as antibiotics, but it doesn't have the side effects and all this fancy story about the biochem as Huberman does. Like, that's his shtick, right?
I've still seen videos on turkesterone on my...
Yeah, you still see it, right? Now, there's no real studies on this, and there never were. And what's interesting is that the hype cycle has moved on. No real science was done, and yet the hype cycle moved on.
Yeah.
There were a couple studies showing no benefit. Even those studies weren't super well done. I could even criticize those studies. I was like, okay, you didn't really disprove it. Like, this was kind of a shitty study. And yet the hype cycle moved on anyway, and nobody talks about turkesterone anymore. Maybe some people are, but it's not at the level of hype that it was, right?
For sure.
And so I just think it's important to consider the fact that when you're hearing about this stuff in social media circles, we've been here before. We've been here with fen-phen. We've been here with mercury for syphilis. We've been here with radium, and we've been here with turkesterone more recently. And in all these cases, what they lack is meeting the standard of scientific evidence.
I feel like we got, a good understanding of how things work, whether to take something or not. But I guess like my question is, would you take that if, there was more research or something like that?
Would I take the IGF-1 LR3? Like if there were
peptides in general, like would you take peptides over steroids?
If there were evidence for it, sure. Like I said, I've taken Ozempic. Ozempic's a peptide.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. I would love anything that promotes health and lets people hit their goals and makes our lives easier. Yeah, absolutely. If you can get more muscle for the same amount of work, like I'm all about it. And I'm willing to balance risks and benefits. I've had several conversations with my patients where one of them was like, hey, I want to go on Ozempic or I want to take testosterone, TRT or whatever. And I was like, I think this is probably going to harm your longevity. And we had a really I remember a conversation in particular, and he was like, dude, doc, I'm single. Like, I want to find a girlfriend. It's more important for me to look good right now than it is for me to live an extra 5 years.
Yeah.
Legit. Hey, okay. Like, hey, you want to have built muscles and a six pack because you feel like you're getting older and you need to find a girlfriend and set up your life in the direction you want it to go, and you're willing to sacrifice a couple years of longevity in your 90s for that. I think that's pretty reasonable. And I was like, cool, go ahead. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But we got to be honest about what the risks and benefits and trade-offs are. And as long as we're honest about that, I think we can have meaningful conversations about what direction we want to go. So yeah, absolutely. Even for this one, if you came to me and you say, hey, I understand that there may be no IGF-1 in this vial. I understand that it may not do anything positive for me, and there's evidence that there may be harms and risks, both short-term and long-term, that we don't know about or can't predict, and I want to do it anyway. I'd be like, a little weird to me, but okay, fine. I'm very libertarian that way. I'm like, hey, it's your body, your life, like go for it. I only start to disagree if you're like, hey, there's all these stories and there's all this evidence, and I'm like, whoa, that's not evidence. You'll find the same level of evidence for astrology and the same level of evidence for crystals and the same level of evidence for everything else. And now I'm going to start arguing with you. It's not the conclusion that I disagree with. It's the reasoning by which you got there. Mm-hmm. And so that's the main thing that I would want to promote for my patients is I'm okay with almost any conclusion as long as we're on the same page about how we're getting there and what standard of evidence we're willing to accept.